In this screencast, we'll cover presidential documents, publication of presidential documents, and agency adjudications and decisions. So what else can you find in the CFR? Also in the CFR are U.S. presidential documents, executive orders, and other documents like proclamations and speeches. There is a special section dedicated to presidential stuff. It's Section 3 of the CFR, labeled the President. The Federal Register is also still the first point of publication for these things. So even for the President, you can find current speeches in the Federal Register because the CFR only gets updated once a year. There is also something called the Weekly Compilation of Presidential Documents available on Lexis and Westlaw, and I believe Hein Online. They are published in bound volumes, and the Lexis and Westlaw and Hein Online, they are published in bound volumes, and that is one section of the CFR we keep every year. So the other sections, you know how they'll switch out colors because we've discarded one and put in a new one because they're supposed to be the current code of federal regulations. Well, we don't do that. We don't throw out Section 3 because we get a new president. We have Part 3 of the CFRs going back pretty far. It is an historical record. That's why we keep it, because we don't need to just throw it out because the rules have changed. It is not the current president that Section 3 monitors. It is an historical record of what the president actually did. There is a separately bound volume of consolidated indexes and tables for that 3 CFR section dealing with the president. That's another peculiarity of the CFR, because when we think of the current CFR, Code of Federal Regulations, for regulatory admin stuff, or the current United States Code, the statutory stuff passed by the legislature, we don't think of them as being historical records. This, Section 3 of the CFR, is the exception to that rule, because Part 3 is part of the historical record. This is what it looks like. It's kind of a zoomed in view of that volume of the Code of Federal Regulations. This is what that Part 3 CFR looks like. So let's talk about the weekly compilation of presidential documents. They've been issued since 1965. There is an annual index, so there's your finding tool. You can find it in Westlaw, Lexis, FedSys, Hein Online. Here's what it looks like in print. This is from the Clinton era, right here. On October 25th, message and observance of Diwali, 2000. Okay. There's also an amendment, so you can find orders, issue statements here as well. There's an amendment in there, you can't quite see it here, but it's listed at the end. Let's go to Hein Online, as Hein has some of this, and Hein Online is pretty great in navigating this stuff. The Hein Library, you can navigate, as you see on the left-hand side, middle of the page, to the Federal Register Library. Not only does the Federal Register collection have the Federal Register updated daily, as well as Federal Register indexes updated daily, it has the Code of Federal Regulations, as you see sort of in the middle of the page, as well as lists of sections affected. So if you click on Code of Federal Regulations, you can search by year, title, part, section. Say you want to search by year. Anyone can search 2013. You can also search 2012, searching 2013. You can search that particular title. Title 3, the President. Say you want to just go to that title. See that button next to where it says Title 3, the President. Click Go to that title. You can browse parts of this Title 3. Say you want to browse Title 3 proclamations, you can do so. Proclamation 8773 of January 13, 2012, Martin Luther King Jr. Federal Holiday, 2012. You can pull up any, because this is a historical document, you can do this for any of those sections, pull up sections by year. Okay? Let's look at standards of conduct instead, Part 100. If you look at this, standards of conduct, it looks much like the rest of the CFR, or the Federal Register. You have your table of contents, sort of in the lower middle left-hand side of the page. You also have your authority, and your source sites, right? As well as the table of contents. Moving on. So we've talked about our rules, regulations, and where to find them. But what happens when we've applied them and someone's not happy with the way the federal government has applied their own rules and regulations to that individual or entity? People are sometimes unhappy. We see this a lot. So there's an administrative process that must be followed internal to that agency. This is frustrating because you're having an agency adjudicate their own wrongs. That's why once it gets out of that process, it can be reviewed by a court. What usually happens is that first a charge is filed with the board. The board then, say it's a labor relations board, the board then investigates and decides whether they can proceed with a claim from that individual, like say employment law. Say somebody feels like they're wrongfully discharged, that they have to file a complaint with the employment agency alleging that they were done wrong. Then there's an internal review by a board, and evidence is heard by an admin law judge, and then say a recommendation is given to the board. Then the board, either the recommendation is adopted or the board writes its own decision. This is where we get frustrated because almost every single section in here, the charge, board's investigation, evidence heard, recommendation adopted, or board writing its own decision, almost every single section is actually not up for public inspection. It is usually a private matter. This is frustrating because you can't find cases that have been heard for you to use as precedent in your own matter, because it's usually held in a closed session where nothing is publicly made available. The individual filing a claim within an agency has a right to privacy. Usually they don't want everyone to know what's going on. Say in employment law, they don't want people to know that say they were found inebriated under their desk or something. We've read decisions like that, at least I have. So all that said, what type of decisions are discoverable? And when I say discoverable, I mean that as a legal term. To get access before that time, oftentimes you can't get access. There are some in-house memoranda. If you know what the memoranda is about and you have some specific details to refer to, you can usually ask someone at the agency to give it to you if they're willing. But that stuff is usually in-house. It's only going between individuals and an agency. They are not discoverable. How about letter rulings? They're kind of like, I have this issue. How do you suggest I proceed? Then you get a letter back from the agency telling you how to do so. Often letter rulings are associated with, say, tax matters. In terms of precedent, letter rulings can be used as generally applicable, but only as a guideline. An actual adjudication is binding on the two parties at hand, but it doesn't always set a precedential value for other like cases. This is the frustration because you aren't quite sure about whether they have a rule about it. It varies from agency to agency. How do you find agency decisions? There's no comprehensive or standardized system of publication. It's really frustrating. And there's no one place where all such decisions are located. So where do you start? So potential sources. Notice I say potential sources of decisions. Lexis and Westlaw, you can start there. They do have some specialized databases dealing with agency adjudications. There are also agency websites. There's USA.gov. There's the Library of Congress. And those are sites that give you links in our clearinghouses that we already talked about to agency websites. And if you search the agency websites, oftentimes they're a great place where you can find a lot of comprehensive materials related to that agency. Publications. Commercial publications, now you can mostly access them through online mini libraries. Okay? There are also official reports. Blue Book Table 1 has a listing of reporters, and I'll show you that in a minute. So those online mini libraries, in any cases, regulations that are within the scope of this law, this is a good place to go. Clicking on mini libraries. They're through the Law Library Database's A to Z publisher site. Let's say we navigate to, I'm looking for like a labor relations, other than that Labor Relations Week, although that's a pretty good one. Labor Relations Week, clicking in there. As you can see, they not only have information on agencies and courts and tribunals, but as you can see, they have finding tools and reported cases. So you can look at recent cases, for example, recent cases reported. And they'll give you lists of cases reported. This actually looks like they're at the federal level. Okay, so they've been appealed out into a court. Again, doing an advanced search through a lot of those mini libraries, depending on what it is, you can do searches for, say, like adjudication or agency decisions. What's great about this is that they're pulling up things like arbitration. Arbitration can be one of those areas where you can't find a lot of information, as it's usually between two parties and they're not releasing a lot. So these mini libraries can help you find a lot of hard to find admin decisions because the libraries are staffed by practitioners. Let's look at this next slide, Table 1 of Blue Book. Here's Table 1 of Blue Book. It gives you the U.S. official administrative publications. It's pretty useful because it tells you exactly where to find some of these official sources. Unfortunately, nobody's decided to put them all together in one big agency library and find them all the way back and make it searchable. That would be tremendously useful. So in this screencast 4, we covered presidential documents, publication of presidential documents, and agency adjudications and decisions. Up next, we'll talk more about online mini libraries, agency websites, federal judicial reviews, admin agency rulings, decisions and orders, and key citing and shepherdizing regulations.